News of Jin breakthrough traveled beyond the Academy walls through quantum communication networks that connected thousands of worlds. Within days, representatives from major galactic institutions were requesting meetings with the human whose simple approach had revolutionized their understanding of problem-solving. The Galactic Engineering Corps sent urgent messages asking for consultation on mechanical failures that had puzzled their best experts for decades. The first major test came when Ambassador Vell, a towering representative of the Engineering Corps, arrived at the Academy, carrying holographic projections of massive machinery that formed the backbone of interstellar civilization. These devices channeled energy between star systems, maintained artificial gravity fields across entire planets, and regulated the quantum tunnels that made faster-than-light travel possible. Ambassador Vell explained that many of these ancient systems had been built by extinct civilizations using techniques that modern science could not fully replicate. The machines still functioned, but they were beginning to develop problems that no amount of advanced analysis could solve. Computer models showed that everything should work perfectly, yet reality disagreed with the calculations. Jin was invited to examine holographic recordings of the malfunctioning systems, while hundreds of the galaxy's finest engineers watched through quantum viewing links. What they saw challenged everything they thought they knew about mechanical maintenance and system repair. The human approached each hologram not as a complex engineering problem, but as a conversation with an old friend. He pointed out stress patterns in metal that sensors had missed vibration, frequencies that indicated component fatigue, and energy flow irregularities that suggested the systems were trying to communicate their needs to anyone who knew how to listen. For a massive energy distributor that had been failing intermittently for over 50 years, Jin identified resonance patterns that developed when certain star systems aligned in specific configurations. The solution involved mechanical adjustments so subtle that they could only be made by feel rather than measurement, changes that restored the system to full functionality within hours. A gravity generator that had been producing unstable fields, despite showing perfect readings on all diagnostic equipment, turned out to be suffering from what Jin called mechanical loneliness. The system had been designed to work in harmony with companion devices that had been removed centuries ago. The solution required installing sympathetic resonators that provided the vibrational companionship the machine needed. Each success demonstrated that human mechanical intuition could solve problems that the galaxy's most advanced analytical methods could not even properly identify. Jin explained that machines, especially old ones, developed personalities over time. They learned from their environments, adapted to their circumstances, and sometimes developed quirks that could only be understood through direct interaction. The implications were staggering. Galactic civilization depended on maintaining complex systems that were not fully understood. If these machines began failing on a large scale, the results could be catastrophic. Yet traditional engineering approaches seemed inadequate for dealing with devices that had evolved beyond their original specifications. Within weeks, human engineers from Earth were being recruited by major galactic corporations. Companies that had previously considered humans too primitive for serious work now competed for access to their unique problem-solving abilities. Trade agreements were hastily negotiated to bring more humans into space, while Earth universities found themselves overwhelmed with requests for exchange programs. Back at the Academy, the curriculum underwent radical changes. Courses in intuitive mechanics became mandatory for all engineering students, while classes in mechanical empathy were added to the psychology department. Students from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy found themselves learning to use their hands in ways their species had not needed for thousands of years. Jin became the Academy's youngest full professor, appointed to the newly created Department of Applied Human Sciences. His classes were always overbooked with students wanting to learn how to combine analytical thinking with physical intuition. The shy farm boy who had felt so out of place now found himself at the center of an educational revolution. Professor Nari worked with Jin to develop new diagnostic techniques that combined her species' rapid visual processing with human tactile sensitivity. The results allowed them to identify mechanical problems that neither approach could detect alone. Professor Day used his aquatic background to understand fluid dynamics in ways that complemented Jin insights. about solid mechanics, while Kale mathematical harmonics provided theoretical frameworks for Jin intuitive discoveries. But perhaps the most significant development was the growing recognition that intelligence itself was far more diverse and complex than anyone had previously understood. Each species brought unique cognitive capabilities to problem solving, and the combination of different approaches often produced solutions that no single method could achieve. The galaxy began to realize that they had been making a fundamental error in assuming that technological advancement automatically meant intellectual superiority. Humans, with their relatively primitive technology, had retained and refined cognitive abilities that more advanced species had lost or never developed. The result was a form of mechanical wisdom that was proving essential for maintaining complex civilizations. Jin often reflected on how strange his life had become. 6 months ago, he had been helping his father repair farm equipment in a small town that most of Earth had never heard of. Now he was teaching some of the most advanced beings in the galaxy how to listen to what machines were trying to tell them. The combination lock that had started it all was displayed in the Academy Museum as a symbol of how the most sophisticated problems sometimes required the simplest solutions. Students from across the galaxy came to see the device that had been opened in 30 seconds by a human who treated it like a friend, rather than an enemy. Engineering problems that had seemed impossible began yielding to teams that combined human intuition with alien analytical power. Ancient machines that had been failing for decades were restored to perfect functionality, while new designs incorporated principles of mechanical empathy that made them more reliable and easier to maintain. The galaxy was learning that true advancement meant not just developing new technologies but understanding all the different ways that intelligent minds could interact with the physical world. Human hands, guided by intuition and empathy, had unlocked secrets that the most sophisticated sensors and computers had missed. Jin Park of Earth had given the galaxy something it had not even realized it was missing: the understanding that machines, like people, responded better to respect and understanding than to domination and force. The simple farm boy had become a teacher of wisdom that transcended the boundaries between species and showed that sometimes the most profound solutions came from remembering what advanced thinking had forgotten. The silence in the classroom stretched until it became almost unbearable. Vextar stood frozen with all 6 arms trembling while his crystalline skin continued shifting through colors that indicated extreme confusion and disbelief. Students who had been breathing stopped entirely, while others began hyperventilating in whatever way their species managed such things. Jin looked around the room, confused by the reaction he was seeing. He had solved the puzzle as requested, and now everyone was acting like he had done something impossible. The lock had not been that difficult once he understood what it really wanted from him, but apparently nobody else saw it the same way. Finally, Vextar found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "How did you do that? Jin Park of Earth, how did you solve in seconds what has taken others hours or days or sometimes never at all?" Jin scratched his head, thinking about how to explain something that seemed obvious to him. "The lock was not really complicated," he said slowly. "It was just pretending to be. The symbols and the shifting surface and all the fancy effects were like decorations on a machine. The real mechanism underneath was much simpler." The human walked back to the lock and picked it up again, causing several students to gasp in alarm. But Jin handled the device, gently turning it over and showing how certain patterns on its surface were actually functional elements, while others were just for show. "These marks here," he said, pointing to grooves that were almost invisible. "They follow the stress patterns in the metal. When you press along these lines, the device responds." Nari leaned forward with her compound eyes spinning rapidly. She had analyzed the lock with sophisticated equipment and had seen only quantum probability fields and dimensional mathematics. How had the human identified physical stress patterns that her instruments had missed? Jin continued his explanation, speaking in the simple, direct way he might use to describe fixing a broken fence back home. "The lock wants to open," he said, causing several students to make sounds of confusion or disbelief. "But it has been designed to only respond to someone who understands its personality." Most people try to solve it like a math problem, but it is really more like taming a wild horse. Day made a bubbling sound that indicated extreme confusion in his species. What do you mean the lock has a personality? He asked mechanical. Devices do not have desires or preferences. They operate according to fixed programming. But Jin shook his head, smiling in the way someone might when explaining something to a child. Everything has personality, if you know how to listen to it. This lock has been handled by thousands of students over thousands of years. Each person who touched it left traces of their energy and intentions. The device learned from each interaction and developed its own way of responding. The human demonstrated by running his hands over the lock surface again, showing how gentle pressure in certain spots caused the symbols to glow more brightly, while harsh or impatient touches made them fade. You have to approach it with respect and curiosity, he explained, not with the desire to dominate or force a solution. It will show you the way if you listen carefully. Kale, the crystal being, stopped his mathematical humming entirely. This approach contradicted everything he knew about problem-solving. His species had built their entire civilization on logical analysis and systematic thinking. The idea that a mechanical device could be understood through empathy rather than calculation was revolutionary. Vex Tar slowly approached Jin, still struggling to process what he was witnessing. You are saying that you solved the Nexus lock through intuition rather than analysis, through feeling rather than thinking. Jin nodded, though he looked slightly embarrassed by the attention. Both really, he said. I used my mind to understand the patterns, but I also used my hands to feel how the device wanted to respond. Humans have always solved problems this way. We build things and fix things by working with materials, not against them. The instructor asked Jin to demonstrate his method again, this time with the entire class watching carefully. As the human hands moved over the lock surface, he described what he was feeling. The vibrations that indicated structural weak points. The temperature variations that showed where energy flowed most easily. The subtle changes in the metal that revealed the sequence of operations needed to unlock the device. What Jin described as natural and obvious required a complete revision of how the other students understood problem. Solving, his approach combined physical intuition with mechanical empathy in ways that their advanced educations had never taught them. The most sophisticated minds in the galaxy had been trying to solve the lock through pure intellect, while the human had succeeded by treating it as a living system that needed understanding, rather than conquest, as word of Jin achievement began to spread through the academy. Other instructors started arriving to witness the phenomenon. Students from advanced classes pressed against the doorway, trying to get a glimpse of the primitive human who had accomplished the impossible. The halls filled with excited chatter in dozens of languages as the news traveled at light speed through quantum communication networks, but Jin himself seemed overwhelmed by all the attention. He had solved a puzzle as requested and could not understand why everyone was treating it like a miracle. Back home on Earth, he fixed broken equipment all the time, using exactly the same combination of analysis and intuition that he had used on the lock. The only difference was that this device was fancier and had more interesting decorations. Vex Tar finally regained enough composure to address the class, though his voice still carried undertones of shock. Students, he announced, what we have witnessed today challenges our fundamental assumptions about intelligence, problem solving, and the nature of understanding itself. Jin Park has shown us that there are ways of thinking that transcend pure analysis, ways of knowing that incorporate wisdom we had forgotten existed. The instructor looked directly at Jin with an expression that mixed respect with bewilderment. Your species may be young in galactic terms, Jin Park, but you have taught us something that our advanced civilizations had lost. We must learn to combine the precision of analysis with the wisdom of intuition, to think with both our minds and our hands. As the class ended and students began filing out, many of them approached Jin with questions and requests for guidance. The shy farm boy who had felt so out of place the day before now found himself at the center of attention from some of the most advanced beings in the galaxy. But perhaps most importantly, Jin had proven that intelligence came in many forms, and that sometimes the most sophisticated problems required the most fundamental solutions. The combination lock that had challenged students for millennia had finally met its match in a human who understood that the best way to solve any puzzle was to first understand what it needed from him. Within hours of Jin breakthrough, news of the impossible solution spread throughout the academy. Like wildfire, students from every department left their studies to come witness the human who had shattered a 3,000-year-old record. Professors abandoned their research to investigate what they were calling the Jin phenomenon, while administrators struggled to manage the crowds gathering outside Vextar classroom. The first to arrive was Professor Zara, a being whose species existed partially in hyperspace and who taught advanced temporal mechanics. Her form flickered in and out of visible reality as she materialized in the classroom, demanding to examine both Jin and the lock. She had been working with the Nexus lock for over a century and refused to believe that anyone could solve it in under 30 seconds. Jin found himself subjected to tests that seemed designed more for studying alien specimens than educating students. Zara ran energy scans across his hands looking for hidden technologies or genetic modifications that might explain his abilities. When the scans showed nothing unusual except slightly higher sensitivity in his fingertips, she began questioning whether the lock had malfunctioned. Professor Dex from the Department of Quantum Engineering arrived next, bringing with him a collection of similar puzzle devices that had been deemed unsolvable by conventional methods. His species, the Vorthak, possessed 12 different types of sensory organs and could perceive energy patterns across 17 different spectrums. Yet when Jin examined Dex puzzles, the human solved 3 of them within minutes, using the same combination of touch and intuition that had opened the Nexus lock. The demonstration sent shockwaves through the gathered professors. Each puzzle had been studied for decades by the finest minds in their respective fields. Advanced computer systems had analyzed every possible combination, while mathematical geniuses had developed complex theories about their construction. Yet Jin's approach bypassed all of that sophistication by treating each device as a mechanical system with its own personality and preferences. Dean Coordinator finally arrived through a fold in space-time that made reality ripple like water. The ancient being had overseen the academy for over 10,000 years and had never before personally investigated a classroom incident. Its presence was so overwhelming that several students had to be helped from the room, while professors found themselves unable to speak clearly. The coordinator observed Jin with senses that operated beyond normal perception, analyzing not just his physical actions, but the quantum signatures of his thoughts and the probability cascades that surrounded his problem-solving processes. What it discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence that had guided galactic education for millennia. Jin Park of Earth, announced the coordinator in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Your approach to these challenges represents a form of intelligence that we had not previously documented. You combine analytical thinking with what your species might call mechanical empathy, creating solutions that transcend the limitations of either approach alone. The ancient being paused as if consulting information sources that existed outside normal time and space. Your success suggests that intelligence is not a single quality that can be measured and compared, but rather a spectrum of different capabilities that can be combined in unexpected ways. Other species have developed beyond the need for physical problem solving, but in doing so, they may have lost access to forms of understanding that remain essential. This revelation created immediate controversy among the faculty. Some professors argued that Jin's success was merely luck, or that the puzzles were somehow flawed. Others demanded that all curriculum be revised to incorporate human-style problem-solving techniques. The debate grew so heated that several species began communicating through pheromone releases that made the air toxic to others. Meanwhile, Jin found himself surrounded by students who wanted to learn his methods. Nari asked if he could teach her to feel mechanical stress patterns, while Day wondered whether his aquatic background might help him develop similar intuition. Kale began experimenting with combining his mathematical harmonics with physical touch to see if he could replicate Jin's approach. The human tried his best to explain techniques that felt natural to him, but had never been formally studied. His descriptions of listening to what machines wanted or feeling the personality of mechanical systems sounded almost mystical to beings whose civilizations had moved far beyond such concepts. Yet when other students attempted to follow his guidance, A few began showing small improvements in their problem-solving abilities. Professor Vex Tar found his entire teaching philosophy challenged by Jin's success. The instructor had spent centuries developing methodical approaches to complex problems based on systematic analysis and patient logical progression. Now he watched a student succeed through intuition and empathy in ways that made his careful methods seem almost primitive. The Academy administration struggled to process the implications of Jin breakthrough. If humans possessed problem-solving capabilities that other species lacked, then perhaps Earth deserved more respect and attention than it had previously received. Diplomatic communications were sent to human authorities requesting more information about their educational methods and mechanical training programs, but the most significant change was in how other students viewed not just Jin, but the entire concept of intelligent. Students who had dismissed humans as primitive now began questioning their own assumptions about superiority and advancement. The galaxy's most prestigious academy was learning that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, and that sometimes the most advanced solutions required the most basic understanding. Research projects were hastily organized to study human problem-solving methods, while professors who had never given Earth a second thought began incorporating discussions of human intuition into their advanced courses. The combination lock that had stumped students for millennia was retired as a graduation requirement, because it no longer represented an adequate challenge for anyone who learned to apply Jin techniques. As the day ended and the crowds finally dispersed, Jin sat alone in the empty classroom, holding the Nexus lock and wondering how his simple approach to fixing things had caused such a commotion. He had not tried to revolutionize education or challenge galactic assumptions about intelligence. He had simply treated the lock the same way he would treat any broken device back home, with respect, patience, and the understanding that every mechanism had its own way of working. But his humble approach had accomplished something that centuries of advanced education had not achieved. Jin had shown the galaxy that true intelligence was not about having the most sophisticated tools or the most complex theories, but about understanding the fundamental relationships between mind and matter, between analysis and intuition, between thinking and feeling. The Academy would never be the same. The next morning arrived with twin suns painting the Academy towers in shades of gold and purple. Jin had barely slept, thinking about the Nexus lock and the way it had seemed almost alive in Vex Tar hands. He arrived at class early, hoping to collect his thoughts before facing another day of feeling like the least qualified student in the room. Other students filtered in gradually, each one looking more confident and prepared than Jin felt. Nari settled into her seat with a stack of crystalline data tablets that projected complex equations into the air around her. Day activated a water-filled breathing apparatus that allowed him to think more clearly in the dry atmosphere. The crystal being whose name Jin had learned was Kale hummed mathematical progressions that created visible sound waves in the air. Vex Tar entered with the same imposing presence as the day before. But today he carried something that made every student straighten in their seats. The Nexus lock sat in a containment field that sparkled with energy, and the device itself seemed more active than before. The symbols around it moved faster, and the humming had taken on an urgent quality that made the classroom feel electric. Today, one of you will face the lock, announced the instructor as he surveyed the room with his multifaceted eyes. I have decided to begin with our newest student, Jin Park of Earth. Perhaps seeing how a less experienced mind approaches the problem will provide insights for the rest of you. Jin felt his stomach drop as every eye in the room turned toward him. Whispers filled the air in dozens of languages, and several students activated recording devices to capture what they clearly expected to be an educational failure. Jin's hands began to shake as he realized he was about to embarrass himself in front of the most advanced beings in the galaxy. Rise, Jin Park commanded Vex Tar, and come to the front of the class on trembling legs. Jin made his way to the instructor desk where the Nexus lock waited in its containment field. Up close, the device was even more impossible than it had seemed from a distance. The surface seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, and looking directly at it made Jin's eyes water. The symbols floating around it cast shadows that moved independently of their sources. The rules are simple, explained Vex Tar as he deactivated the containment field. You must unlock the device using only observation logic and your understanding of universal principles. You may not damage it or use external tools. Only your mind and hands may touch the lock. Most students require between 6 and 12 hours. The fastest time ever recorded is 4 hours and 37 minutes. Jin reached out hesitantly toward the lock and gasped as his fingers made contact. The metal was neither hot nor cold but seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The symbols swirling around it cast patterns of light across his hands, and he could feel vibrations running through the device like a heartbeat behind him. Jin could hear his classmates settling in for a long wait. Nari activated her analysis programs and began recording energy patterns. Day started calculating probability matrices while Kale hummed theoretical frameworks that might apply to the lock construction. They all expected this to take hours and were prepared to study Jin methods for future reference. But as Jin's hands moved across the lock surface, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling confused or overwhelmed, he began to notice things. The vibrations were not random. They followed patterns that reminded him of machinery back on Earth. The way the symbols moved reminded him of gears turning in his father's old tractor. The humming sounded like the wind through the barn rafters during storms. Vextar began to turn away, already preparing his standard lecture about patience and methodical analysis. In his 3,000 years of using the lock, no student had ever done anything interesting in the first few minutes. The human would be no different, probably less capable than most given his primitive background. The instructor expected to find Jin still examining the lock basic structure when he turned back around, but Jin was not examining the lock, he was working with it. His hands moved across its surface not like someone trying to solve a puzzle, but like someone greeting an old friend. Where other students saw impossible complexity, Jin found familiar patterns. His fingers followed the rhythm of the vibrations and pressed in harmony with the device's natural pulse. The first click echoed through the silent classroom like thunder. Vextar froze in mid-turn, his crystalline skin beginning to shift from blue, green to purple. The instructor had heard that sound thousands of times, but never so soon. Never before he had even finished turning around. Behind him, the whispered conversation stopped as students tried to process what they were hearing. A second click followed, then a third. Jin's hands moved with growing confidence as he felt the lock responding to his touch. Each pressure point seemed to guide him to the next one like a familiar melody that his fingers remembered even though his mind had never heard it before. The device was not fighting him. It was showing him the way. Around the classroom, students began to panic in their own ways. Nari compound eyes spun in patterns that indicated maximum processing speed as she tried to understand what was happening. Day gills fluttered rapidly as his breathing became shallow. Kale mathematical humming became discordant as his calculations failed to match reality. Click, click, click. The sounds came faster now as Jin found his rhythm. The symbols around the lock began to glow brighter and move in more organized patterns as if they were happy to finally be understood. The vibrations in the device strengthened, becoming less like a whisper and more like a song in less than 30 seconds from when he first touched the device. Jin felt the final mechanism yield. The Nexus lock opened with a conclusive click that seemed to shake the foundations of reality itself. Inside the lock was a small crystal that pulsed with warm light and a sense of completion that filled the room with peace. Jin set the opened lock back on the desk and looked up at Vextar with a slight smile. "I think I got it," he said in the kind of voice someone might use to announce they had finished their homework. The understatement was so complete and the situation so impossible that for a moment nobody in the room could speak. Vextar's 6 arms trembled as he stared at the opened lock, his ancient mind struggling to process what had just occurred. In 3,000 years of teaching at the most prestigious academy in the galaxy, he had never encountered anything that challenged his understanding so completely. The human had not just broken a record. He had shattered the very concept of what was possible. The silence stretched on as students and instructor alike tried to comprehend that their entire understanding of problem-solving intelligence and the nature of challenges had just been turned upside down by a simple farm boy from a primitive world who had treated the most complex puzzle in known space like a broken tractor that needed fixing. The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal towers of the Galactic Academy of Universal Sciences. Jin walked slowly through the main entrance, his small bag slung over his shoulder, and his eyes wide with wonder. The building stretched up, so high he could not see the top, and the walls seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. Students from dozens of different worlds moved past him, some floating, others walking on multiple legs, and a few that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Jin had never seen anything like this place back on Earth. He came from a small farming town where the tallest building was only 3 stories high, and the most advanced technology was the old tractor his father used in the fields. Now he stood in the most famous school in the galaxy, surrounded by beings whose civilizations had mastered space travel before humans had even discovered fire. The acceptance letter had arrived 6 months ago, written in symbols that appeared in his mind, rather than on paper. The message was simple. Jin Park of Earth had been selected for the Advanced Problem-Solving program at the Academy. His family had celebrated, but Jin felt more nervous than excited. How could a simple farm boy from a backward planet succeed alongside the brightest minds in the universe? As he walked through the corridors, Jin noticed how the other students looked at him. Some whispered to each other in languages that sounded like music or rushing water. Others communicated through flashing lights or chemical scents that made his nose tingle. A few simply stared with eyes that had too many pupils or no pupils at all. The classroom was enormous, with seats that could adjust to accommodate beings of any size or shape. Jin found his assigned spot near the middle row next to a student who looked like a giant praying mantis with silver skin. Her name tag read Nari, and she was from the Zephyr system. When she noticed Jin looking at her, she made a sound like wind, chimes that he guessed was laughter. Across the aisle sat Day, a blue-skinned male whose neck had slits that opened and closed as he breathed. His world was mostly ocean, and he needed special equipment to survive in the dry air of the classroom behind. Jin was a student whose body seemed to be made of living crystal, and who hummed softly in harmonies that made the air vibrate. Other students filled the remaining seats. A female with 4 arms and skin like polished stone. A male whose head was surrounded by floating geometric shapes that pulsed with different colors. A being that looked human except for the third eye in the center of its forehead that never blinked. Each one came from a civilization thousands of years more advanced than Earth. Jin pulled out his simple notebook and pen while his classmates activated holographic displays, neural interfaces and devices he could not even begin to understand. He felt very small and very alone in this place of wonders, but he tried to sit up straight and look confident even though his heart was beating fast. The instructor entered the room and Jin had to stop himself from gasping. Vex-Tar stood nearly 10 feet tall with 6 arms that moved independently of each other and skin that looked like it was carved from blue-green crystal. His eyes were large and multifaceted like an insect's, but they held intelligence that seemed ancient and vast. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Problem-Solving Theory," the instructor said as he moved to the front of the room. "This course will challenge everything you think you know about logic, mathematics, and the nature of intelligence itself. You represent the finest minds from across the galaxy, and over the next year you will learn to solve problems that have puzzled civilizations for millennia." Vex-Tar began calling names for introductions. Each student stood and spoke about their world, their achievements, and their goals. Nari explained that her species could process visual information at speeds that made computers look slow. Dai described how his people had built cities in the deepest ocean trenches where the pressure would crush most materials. The crystal, being hummed about mathematical theorems that existed in 11 dimensions. When Jin's name was called, he stood on shaky legs. All eyes in the room focused on him, and he felt very aware of his simple clothes and ordinary appearance. "I am Jin Park," he said in a voice that sounded smaller than he intended. "I come from Earth. We are a young species, but we work hard and try to learn." Jin sat down quickly, hoping that was enough. Several students made sounds that might have been amusement or confusion. Earth was barely known in galactic circles. Most beings considered it a primitive world, whose people had only just learned to leave their own planet. What could such a species possibly contribute to advanced studies? The whispers that followed Jin's introduction were not cruel, but they were not encouraging either. Vextar raised one of his 6 hands for silence and the room became still. As he reached into a dimensional pocket that seemed to exist in the space between his fingers, the instructor pulled out an object that made every student lean forward with curiosity. It was a combination lock, but unlike any lock that had ever existed in normal space. The device seemed to shift and change as Jin watched it. The surface rippled like water, but held its shape like solid metal. Strange symbols floated around it in the air, glowing and fading and rearranging themselves in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The lock hummed with energy that made Jin's teeth ache, and the air around it shimmered as if reality itself was uncertain about what the object really was. "This, students, is the Nexus lock," said Vextar as he held the impossible device up for all to see. It was created using principles from 17 different mathematical systems incorporating quantum mechanics, dimensional folding, and probability cascades that most of you will not encounter until your final year. It represents the ultimate test of systematic thinking and patient analysis. The instructor explained that the lock had been given to students for over 3,000 years. In all that time, no student had ever opened it in less than 6 hours. The record holder, a brilliant individual from the Cerebus cluster, had solved it in 4 hours and 37 minutes. That record had stood unchallenged for 2 centuries. Every student who graduates from this program must eventually face the Nexus lock, continued Vextar. It will test not just your intelligence but your ability to think in ways that transcend the limitations of your species. Most of you will spend days working on this puzzle. Some will never solve it at all, but all will learn from the attempt. Jin stared at the lock, feeling something strange in his chest. It was not fear, exactly, and not excitement either. It was more like recognition, as if he had seen something similar before, though he knew that was impossible. The device continued to shift and change, but Jin found himself following the patterns, watching the way the symbols moved and listening to the rhythm of its humming. "Class is dismissed for today," announced Vextar as he made the lock disappear back into its dimensional pocket. "Tomorrow we will begin our formal studies. But remember, students, the greatest problems are often solved not through complex analysis but through understanding the simple truths that complexity tries to hide." As the students filed out of the room, Jin remained in his seat, thinking about the instructor's final words. The other students chattered excitedly about the lock and speculated about how it might be solved. Their conversations were filled with references to mathematical theories and scientific principles that Jin had never heard of. But something told him that maybe they were all thinking about the problem in the wrong way. 1 year after Jin had solved the Nexus lock in 30 seconds, the Galactic Academy of Universal Sciences looked very different. The crystal towers still stretched toward the twin suns, but now they hummed with a different kind of energy. Students from hundreds of worlds still walked the corridors, but their conversations mixed mathematical theories with discussions of mechanical empathy and intuitive problem-solving. Jin stood before his largest class, yet a mixture of students, professors, and visiting dignitaries from across the galaxy who had come to learn what was now being called the human approach to complex systems. The shy farm boy who had once felt intimidated by the Academy's sophistication now moved with quiet confidence as he demonstrated techniques that were revolutionizing galactic engineering. Today, Jin was working with a group of advanced students on a project that would have been impossible before his breakthrough. They were designing new spacecraft engines that incorporated both cutting-edge quantum mechanics and principles of mechanical sympathy. The results were more efficient, more reliable, and somehow more alive than traditional designs. Nari, now served as Jin research partner, had developed new, visual analysis techniques that could identify stress patterns and energy flows that complemented human tactile sensitivity. Her compound eyes worked in harmony with Jin hands to diagnose problems and develop solutions that neither species could achieve alone. Their partnership had become a model for interspecies collaboration. Day had returned to his ocean world where he was applying human-inspired techniques to maintain the vast underwater cities of his people. The combination of his aquatic engineering knowledge with Jin mechanical empathy had solved problems that had plagued Title VII for generations. His reports were studied throughout the galaxy as examples of how different cognitive approaches could be combined. Kyle, The crystal being had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. His mathematical harmonics now incorporated rhythms that reflected the personalities of mechanical systems, creating music that could actually tune and calibrate complex devices. His concerts had become legendary, combining artistic beauty with practical engineering in ways that no one had previously imagined. Professor Vex Tar, who had initially been shocked by Jin approach, now taught courses that combined systematic analysis with intuitive understanding. His students learned to use both their minds and their hands to solve problems, developing cognitive flexibility that made them more effective than previous generations. The ancient instructor often said that Jin had taught him more in one day than he had learned in centuries of traditional teaching. The Academy Museum now featured an entire wing dedicated to the human approach to problem solving. The original Nexus lock was displayed alongside dozens of other devices that had been considered unsolvable until human techniques were applied. Visitors came from across the galaxy to study these examples of mechanical empathy in action. But the most important change was not in technology or curriculum, but in how galactic civilization understood intelligence itself. The assumption that advancement meant moving beyond physical interaction had been replaced by recognition that true wisdom required combining all available cognitive capabilities. Different species brought unique strengths to problem solving, and the greatest achievements came from collaboration rather than competition. The Galactic Engineering Corps now employed thousands of human consultants who worked alongside alien experts to maintain the complex systems that connected thousands of worlds. Ancient machines that had been failing for decades were restored to perfect functionality, while new designs incorporated principles that made them more responsive to the needs of those who operated them. Trade between Earth and the galaxy had expanded far beyond anyone's imagination, but it was not the usual exchange of resources and manufactured goods. Instead, Earth exported knowledge, wisdom, and ways of thinking that could not be replicated by technology. Human engineers, philosophers, and teachers traveled to distant worlds, sharing insights that came from their species' unique relationship with the physical world. Jin often received messages from former classmates who were applying human-inspired techniques in their home systems. Planets that had struggled with mechanical failures were functioning smoothly, while civilizations that had relied entirely on automated systems were rediscovering the value of hands. On problem solving, the ripple effects of his simple breakthrough continued to spread. The Academy had established exchange programs with universities on Earth, bringing human students to learn galactic science while sending alien students to Earth to study human approaches to mechanical systems. The result was a new generation of problem solvers who combined the best of both analytical and intuitive thinking. But perhaps Jin's greatest achievement was not in solving mechanical problems, but in teaching the galaxy about humility and respect. His approach showed that the most advanced solutions often came from treating systems and problems as partners, rather than obstacles that needed to be overcome. The combination lock had taught him that every mechanism had its own personality and preferences, and that success came from understanding rather than domination. As Jin looked out at his diverse class of students, he reflected on how much had changed the human who had once felt so out of place in the academy. Sophisticated environment now served as a bridge between different ways of thinking. His simple insight that machines responded to empathy and respect had transformed not just engineering but the entire approach to education and problem-solving across the galaxy. The lesson was simple but profound. Intelligence came in many forms, and true advancement required understanding and combining all available ways of thinking. The galaxy's most sophisticated civilizations had learned from a farm boy who treated a puzzle like a friend that sometimes the most complex problems required the most basic human touch. The Nexus lock that had started it all now served as a symbol of something greater than mechanical problem. Solving it represented the understanding that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, that different did not mean inferior, and that the greatest achievements came from combining, rather than competing, different approaches to understanding the world. Professor Jin Park of Earth had taught the galaxy that true intelligence was not about having the most advanced tools or theories, but about understanding the fundamental relationships that connected all things. The human touch had unlocked More than just a combination lock, it had opened new possibilities for cooperation, understanding, and growth across the stars. The instructor had given them a combination lock, expecting it to take hours to solve. The human had cracked it before he turned around, and in doing so had unlocked something far more valuable than any mechanism. The understanding that intelligence, wisdom, and solutions came in forms as diverse as the species that sought them.